You're listening to the Journey podcast. When it comes to hormones, women's health can be challenging to understand. How can we successfully navigate the journey of menopause? Find out more in this episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. It's difficult to explain all the things that happen during menopause to someone who hasn't been there. The hot flashes, brain fog, weight issues, and aches and pains sometimes seem like they couldn't possibly be related. And understanding how menopause can affect us can be a long road. Jacqueline Rose is passionate about women's health and in particular, menopause. Many healthcare providers are not specialized in women's health, and getting answers about what is happening to your body can be downright frustrating and discouraging. Working with a menopause educator and coach can help you make sense of the changes that happen during menopause, and it can help you feel supported and understood as you move through this hormonal journey toward answers, options, and well-being. Jacqueline is a menopause educator and coach, women's hormonal health practitioner, yoga for women's health teacher, and therapeutic yoga teacher. As a married mother of 5, she was multitasking, juggling life, work, family, responsibilities, and feeling overwhelmed until she discovered Yoga and Nashid, yoga for women's health. Through her studies and teaching, she has developed a deeper understanding, awareness, and connection to her body, how it works, and how it naturally changes over time. She found practical ways to create balance and manage expectations despite her very busy life. Her mission is to support and empower women to be proactive and improve their own health and well-being. She's especially passionate about changing the way women understand and experience their menopause journey. Jacqueline believes that good women's health and well-being begins by understanding our hormones, creating hormonal balance, and having strong hormonal health throughout our life. Using a holistic, personalized approach and yoga-based tools and techniques, Jacqueline supports her clients to identify triggers for hormonal imbalance, implement practical strategies to create hormonal balance, manage their menopause symptoms, and navigate this time of their life with ease, joy, and confidence. Let's meet Jacqueline Rose. Hi, Jacqueline Rose. It's so great to have you on the podcast. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because menopause is a topic that is so intertwined with women's well-being and holistic healing, and I'm excited to dive in. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have.
Yes, me too. And for starters, do you want to share a little bit about your own journey, your personal background?
Yeah. So I am Jacqueline. I am a menopause educator and coach, hormonal health specialist, and very passionate women's health advocate, which I think is sort of the overarching thing that maybe I would say about sort of the work that I do and how it really intersects with what you're doing in the podcast is really about empowering women to get proactive, to change or be empowered to change their health and well-being and to really understand what is going on in their body. And I began that journey of awareness and connection to my body about 8-9 years ago after I had given birth to my 5th child. I'm blessed with 5 children. And after I gave birth to my 5th child, a little bit later, about 9 months later, I decided I wanted to do something totally different. And I just wanted to do something for myself. And I had a, very long career in the environmental field, but I decided to train as a yoga teacher for pregnancy and birth. And I sort of did it because I practiced yoga off and on over the years. And obviously, I'd been pregnant and given birth 5 times. And I thought, this may be just an interesting thing to do for myself. I sort of know what they're going to be talking about, but, I just wanted to do something for myself. And I think I just wanted the excuse to practice yoga. And I discovered I knew nothing about my body. I knew nothing about being pregnant. I knew nothing about being birthed. All my births had been the traditional, typical medicalized birthing processes. My first one was 10 days late and she was quite big. And that was sort of, I guess, my most normal birth. And then my 2 and 3 were inductions and 4 and 5 were cesareans. So as we all do, we all think, we see birthing on television, we see it in movies, we see it, on TV shows, and we think that is what it's meant to be. And only when I really started going into the world of yoga and connecting to my body and understanding my body experience and really listening, having the space to listen to your body, I realized that it could be totally, totally different. From there, I've done lots of different things. I've trained in a few different yoga modalities, but really I today am working and supporting women on their menopause journey. But it really began, with that very enlightened and experience of realizing that everything that I thought I knew that I had done myself was totally, I don't know, like not wrong, but just, it could be different. There was another way of doing it that was so much more connected and in tune with your body.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What a journey. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And throughout this journey that you have taken so far, and I mean, we're all aware that hormones play a really big role throughout a woman's life. And that changes, of course, from when we're younger into our adult years and then later on past menopause. So do you want to talk a little bit about that role that the hormones play throughout a woman's life?
Yes. And thank you for asking me about that, because you're giving me an opportunity to get onto my soapbox. And that is really that I really, really believe that hormonal health is the foundation for all women's health. And anything that a woman goes through, as you said, from puberty really until the day we die, is based in, or the sources of what we're experiencing can be found in our hormonal health, or more correctly, hormonal imbalance and poor hormonal health and sort of lack of hormonal resilience. So let's start at the beginning. We have about 50, if not more, different hormones in our endocrine system, and many of them, male and female, have the same. But obviously females have a reproductive system, and those hormones are very significant because not only do they manage and monitor and regulate our menstrual cycle, our reproductive system, they also have major knock-on effects to the other hormones. For example, cortisol, the stress hormone, insulin, the blood sugar regulating hormone, melatonin, the sleep hormone, serotonin, and oxytocin, the feel-good hormones. So there is a lot of knock-on effects from a poor reproductive hormonal cycle. And naturally, what I want all women to know is that our hormones are naturally changing throughout our day, throughout our monthly cycle, throughout our life cycle. And once we understand that, and that sort of fact has often been used in very negative language, in very patriarchal or misogynist language, being a hormonal woman, all the derogatory language that often we use on ourselves about, I've got my period and therefore, or I'm feeling hormonal and therefore. And it's used back on us, and it's used in lots and lots of different ways, culturally, professionally, in media. But I always say that women need to stand up and say, I'm proud to be a hormonal woman, because our hormones allow us not only to bring children into the world, to be creative and to give life. You may choose not to have children, or you may be unable to have children, but our hormones define us as feminine, creative, intuitive beings. And that is something that we should be exceptionally proud of and we should be embracing. So our hormones have a life cycle. They change over the course of our lives. There are set stages of hormonal transition, puberty, reproductive years, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Our hormones are doing specific things in each of those stages. And then obviously we have a monthly cycle, and we obviously have, as many women will sometimes know, even a 24-hour cycle. I will say that men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle, and typically women have a 30-day hormonal cycle, which already starts to take a difference between male and female. But where our hormones are, how they're working, if they're in balance, if they're out of balance, if they're working in harmony with each other, if there are triggers for imbalance and they are disrupted. Have we lived years in hormonal imbalance and now we have poor hormonal resilience, for example, in perimenopause when our hormones are doing their natural crazy fluctuations? So there's so much to unpack here, but that's sort of the baseline of what I think every woman needs to be aware of.
Yeah, wow, that is a lot of information. And thank you so much for going through that. And I know we could probably do a few more episodes just on hormones. So, yeah, and hormones are obviously also deeply connected to our mental well being and our physical well being. And especially as women, as we go through these life changes in the hormones, we might experience different ways that it affects our mental well-being. And one of those ways is, of course, menopause. And having just kind of entered into that myself, I can definitely relate to all the things that start happening. And what would you say that this modern menopause journey looks like today, as maybe even as opposed to 20 or 50 years ago, how women would have experienced it then, maybe even also socially and culturally, but certainly also physically and mentally?
Yeah, so I could also talk about perimenopause and menopause for hours and hours, but I think as it relates specifically to mental health and changes that we experience during this time, I think one of the biggest myths around, or really the biggest things around perimenopause and menopause is when it begins and how it shows up. And 50, 70 years ago, when our grandmothers or mothers, previous generations were going through menopause, menopause was very much the beginning of the end or the beginning of decline. And so the image that menopause was for older women, this definitely is true, in 100 years ago, which now isn't even all that long ago, 100 years ago, the women experienced menopause really as the beginning of the end, the decline. Your health deteriorated, your relevance in society often deteriorated, especially in a Western society. In other societies, Asian societies and African societies, an older woman is revered. She is the wise woman. She is often the head of the tribe. She is the one leading all the other women in their round circles and in their activities. But in Western culture, definitely the older woman was less relevant. Her health would be deteriorating. She wouldn't have very many opportunities, in her 60s. As you correctly said, the modern menopause journey looks very, very different. But with that, we are still carrying the baggage of language, stereotypes, cultural references that we are starting to really change and remove. So today, the average age of menopause is 51. In some countries, it's a bit lower. In some countries, it's a bit higher, but the average age is around 51. But a 51-year-old woman today still has at least 30 to 40 years left of full life. It is not the beginning of the end. There is no decline happening. Our medical healthcare system are keeping people alive in good health for many, many years. There are economic opportunities. There are professional opportunities. There are social, cultural opportunities for women today well into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so we need to start understanding perimenopause and menopause in a very different cultural, socioeconomic framework. That being said, we also need to understand what perimenopause is and how perimenopause shows up. And I think this is really where we connect to the mental health aspects of it, because perimenopause is the years leading up to menopause, and that can be 10 years. Women can go into perimenopause in their early 40s, and it can be totally non-identified, totally misunderstood, totally not recognized. And women, as we know, many of the perimenopause symptoms are changes in brain function, in cognitive function, brain fog, short-term memory loss, lack of focus, lack of concentration, anxiety, depression, mood swings. These are typical perimenopause symptoms. But so many women in their 40s don't know that they're in perimenopause, don't know that this is typical perimenopause experiences, and get very nervous, get very scared, don't know what's going on, can't get out of bed in the morning, go to their doctors, and their doctors see these classic symptoms of mental health challenges, classic symptoms of depression. They get diagnosed antidepressants. And these women just don't know what is going on with them. They don't understand because maybe they're in a stressful job. We're all unfortunately leading very stressful lives in, 2022. We all are juggling a lot of balls coming out of, 2.5, 3 years of crazy world changing pandemic. We are all leading very stressed out lives. And so when you go to your doctor and you say, this is my life, this is what I'm juggling, this is where I am, and the doctors, very unfortunately, are very not educated in identifying perimenopause and perimenopause symptoms, these women enter into a language and a framework that may or may not be relevant. And I just want to put a very strong disclaimer here. I am not antidepressants. I am not pro, navigating things holistically and naturally only. Where antidepressants are necessary, they are a life-saving treatment. My problem is when women are being diagnosed with depression when it's only perimenopause, or when really the diagnosis is something totally normal and natural part of their life journey, just it's been totally misdiagnosed and totally misrepresented. That is not also to ignore the very, very significant impacts that these mental health challenges have on women, even if it is only, and I put only in inverted commas, even if it is only perimenopause. The stories of women who cannot get out of bed, the stories of women who are lethargic, low energy, who have these terrible mood swings, who can't focus, who can't perform at the highest level of their jobs because of all these symptoms is real. And I want to acknowledge the women who are experiencing that. But I just want to reframe the conversation of understanding that this is perimenopause. You don't necessarily need the diagnosis of depression.
That's a really good point. And I can definitely speak to that as well, because some of those things I've been experiencing in the past few years, and I was really wondering what the heck was going on with me. So that definitely can be an issue if you start experiencing things, especially early on in your 40s, where you might not even be relating this to perimenopause in any kind of way, because you think, oh, it's too early. I'm like 10 years too early. What could this be? And how that can affect you. So thank you so much for talking about that and highlighting that a little bit.
I just also, sorry, Petra, I also just want to mention here ADHD. Can I talk about that also?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that.
So ADHD, we know it's on the rise with children. And I am seeing and hearing many more women in their 40s being diagnosed with ADHD. Executive brain dysfunction, disorganization, again, like not being able to fulfill tasks, And for many of these women, I'd put sort of maybe 3 categories of women. The first category is women that are being diagnosed as a result of their children being diagnosed. So all of a sudden, a woman turns around and realizes that she was never diagnosed. She somehow, managed through life. But when her kids get diagnosed ADHD, she sees the signs in herself and then she gets diagnosed. And that's, a legitimate diagnosis. There are women who maybe didn't understand why they were never able to fully function. It was always so much harder for them. And then they do get diagnosed later on in life because now we have more tools and more language around it and more understanding about ADHD. So these women are naturally getting diagnosed later on in life, but they always sort of felt that there was something going on with them. And then there's a third category of women, and this sort of relates to our conversation. And these are women who are getting diagnosed in their 40s as ADHD. And I want to sort of hazard a guess that actually it's perimenopause. Now, that's not to denigrate or to, not take seriously anyone who has real ADHD diagnosis. But I think that many women who are newly diagnosed in their 40s potentially are actually perimenopausal. And that doesn't mean the strategies for treatment are not appropriate. But again, it's more about how we are using and how we are pigeonholing women in their 40s who are actually perimenopausal, but we are giving them all these labels of all these other things. And the relevance of this is because perimenopause passes. You go into menopause and then you go into postmenopause. These are natural, normal life stages of a woman. And in postmenopause, everything changes again. And your hormones are at different levels again. And you are a different person in postmenopause. So again, the strategies you may be given, the treatment you may be given may be the same. It's more about how you see yourself, the framework in which you are put or not put, the treatment that may or may not differ, and how you define yourself based on a diagnosis that may or may not be temporary.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially considering some of the effects that a diagnosis can have on individuals, positive and negative. So that's really important to keep in mind. And can women do tests or ask for tests from their doctors to actually determine whether it is perimenopause or not?
So the only sort of medical tests that are done are blood tests. Blood tests at this stage of perimenopause are a little bit inconclusive because perimenopause is defined as hormonal fluctuation. So a one-time blood test won't reveal all that much. You may need a few blood tests over the course of a few months to see trends. But really, we diagnose according to symptoms. What are you experiencing? What are you going through? What is your age? And someone, who is a menopause specialist who has been, done menopause training like myself, and doctors also now, there are lots of specialist training, short-term training programs that doctors can do to get educated to understand the signs of perimenopause and menopause. So it's more symptom and experience based to really understand, what a woman is experiencing and if that falls in line with how perimenopause can show up, and really speaking with someone who understands and knows this. And blood tests can often come to support, but I know a lot of doctors don't like to do blood tests because they think blood tests are irrelevant at this stage. I don't think they're irrelevant. I think that we need to know what we're looking for in our blood tests. We need to see the markers. We need to understand the markers. We need to see optimal ranges rather than normal ranges, and we need to see patterns. And yeah, I would agree, however, that a one-time blood test is not going to reveal all that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And to close out the episode, let's talk a little bit about how women in perimenopause or menopause can start managing their symptoms, because obviously that can have a great impact on their lives. And what can they do? What are their options?
Yeah. So again, if we understand perimenopause, menopause as a hormonal fluctuating time and hormonal, that we want to try and create as much hormonal balance and support our hormonal system. So that's sort of how I look at it. And when we look at every woman individually, her specific symptoms, her experience, where she's coming from, and also what has been going on in her life in the last 20 years, because how you arrive at perimenopause is impacted by what's gone on in the last 20 years. Have you led a stressed out life? Have you been eating a poor, high carb, high sugar diet? Do you exercise or move? What is your sleep like? Like, all of these things feed into your hormonal health and how you arrive at perimenopause. But let's look at just sort of perimenopause in itself, like, the 10 years, in your 40s, or, 15 years, 40 to 55. What is going on with your hormones and how can we support your hormones? And I really look at 5 pillars, 5 areas that can trigger hormonal imbalance, and using those 5 areas of how we can support our hormones. And I look at stress, nutrition, sleep, movement, and self-care. And within those 5 areas, there is a lot of information and a lot of things that we can do. But really, those 5 areas. So stress, and there are 4 different types of stress, which I won't go into now, but stress is a profound trigger for hormonal imbalance. Nutrition, what you eat, when you eat, how you eat, and the type of food that you need in perimenopause and menopause to support you is very different to what you need in your 20s and 30s. Sleep is profound, has a major impact on mental health and mental cognition and how we are able to sort of function and navigate ourselves, and on, restoring our body and our hormones. Movement, and I don't say exercise, I say movement, because movement is much more than just exercise, and being able to move your body in lots of different ways. And the type of movement that we need, again, in perimenopause and menopause is slightly different. We need varied movement, and movement should be fun. And the self-care element, and the self-care element shouldn't be taken for granted. We are looking at self-care, work-life balance, lifestyle. A lot of that is about boosting the feel-good hormones, not just about balancing the reproductive hormones and the stress hormones and insulin and those types of things, but also the feel-good hormones. We want that, goes a massive long way to balancing out our hormones. So I sort of work with my clients on each of those areas. And for some women, it's going to be one and not the other. It's not necessarily 5 areas equally, but those are sort of the areas to start. And using yoga. I use a lot of sort of yoga as my basis for a lot of these things. It's not only yoga, it's a much more integrative, functional approach. But I think yoga hits a lot of these things, all together. So I'm a very big proponent of including yoga also in whatever strategies you're adopting.
That's fantastic. And do you want to go over some of your own programs and services so listeners can get an idea of how they could connect with you if they feel aligned and want to include you in their healing journey?
Thank you. Yes. So I do a lot of education stuff, workshops, trainings, speaking at events and retreats where I talk about a lot of this stuff and more, because as I said at the very beginning, most women don't even know this stuff. It's not that they're not doing it because they are choosing not to. They're not doing it because they don't know the information. So that's one thing that I do. And I run a lot of, those things online, and I'm invited to do events. So that's one side of things. And the second thing is sort of the practical strategy side, where I work with my clients. I do a one-to-one menopause consultation. And I also do more implementation, more of the coaching. I have an 8-week program where we really go through all these different areas, the 5 pillars, what is relevant for you, and under each pillar, what are strategies that are relevant for you. I want all my strategies to be personalized, easy to implement, and relevant to where you are at your stage of life. Like, as I said, I'm a working mother of 5 kids. I know what it's like to be busy and running around. And if you're going to give me 10 things to do and they're just not relevant and I can't implement them into my daily routine, I'm not going to do them. So I really work together with the woman of where she is, what her experiences are, so that we can do things that are going to make a difference. And hopefully the small things at the beginning make a big difference. And she feels the impact. She already, has more energy. She's sleeping better. She doesn't feel as bloated. She's able to concentrate in a meeting, or her joints don't hurt her as much. Once she starts to really feel the difference and that her symptoms are, reducing, it helps her to carry on. So those are sort of the main 2 ways that I work with women directly, and I have all the educational side also.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we will be linking to all of Jacqueline's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can connect with her directly. And this has been another incredible episode. And I really hope our listeners have enjoyed the journey into menopause. I have to say this was so educational, and thank you so much for bringing all this information to light, because as you said, many women don't know about this, and it's important that we start highlighting some of these things around menopause and hormones. And it has been fantastic chatting with you on the podcast, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, and take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please subscribe, share on social media, and leave us a review. And be sure to get your copy of our brand new ebook called Break Free. Sending you love and courage, and see you next week. Until then, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and the Journey blog.